Now we're looking at Chapter 7, Section 3, pages 220 and 221, titled Greek Culture Spreads. Well, Philip ruled for about 20 years. Alexander ruled for a little more than 10 years. And then he died. Well, Alexander didn't have anybody to pass the kingship directly to. And so there were some problems. They ended up spending 50 years arguing about who was going to be in charge, who was going to be the next king. And what ended up occurring was that Alexander's huge empire, from Greece down to Egypt, up through Jerusalem, through Babylon, all the way over to the Indus River, they ended up splitting it up. And they made 3 separate kings over 3 separate little areas. Well, still fairly large, but little compared to what Alexander had controlled. Now, each one of those leaders had men who stayed behind with them. They maintained Greek-style cities throughout the Middle East, throughout Persia, and because of that, they still thought of themselves as Greeks, even though they were living 1,000 miles away in some cases. And so they wanted to get things from home. They set up trade routes going all the way back to Greece so that they could get the things that they wanted from back home. And so this naturally continued to carry a lot of Greek culture throughout that area in the Middle East. Well, when we look at those Hellenistic kingdoms, those 3 areas that were split up from Alexander's empire, now Alexander had set things up suggesting that people could maintain their own culture as long as they agreed to some other things. Basically, he said you could do what you want. You just have to agree that I am the one in charge. I am your king. I am the one who makes the final decisions around here. 2, you have to agree to pay your taxes to me. If I'm your king, I'm the one that you are loyal to. You give me your tax money. And finally, if you are loyal and fight for me, well then, you can continue your way of life. You can continue to worship the way you want to. You just have to add in what the Greeks believe are important. You have to learn Greek. You have to be a part of this Greek plan. And I will give you more than anything you have had before. I'll make sure that you get the great things from Greece. And so he built Greek temples and agoras. He made sure that they had large theaters and they held Greek plays. The people within the cities learned to speak Greek, or they were already from Greece, and so they spoke Greek. And all 3 of the kings after Alexander shared the ideas that Greek should be the dominant culture. They believed it was the best possible culture available. They wanted the Hellenistic culture to lead. That Greek history and the culture that came from Hellene, the Greeks. And it was all after the death of Alexander the Great. Well, Greek culture really took hold in Egypt. There was the city of Alexandria. There you go, named after Alexander again. It was the biggest and most Hellenistic, the most Greek city outside of Greece itself. It was a center of business and trade. It was right at the edge of the Nile River, where it reached the Mediterranean Sea, so it was part of the Nile River Delta, and it had a double harbor, which meant that it was it had an extra large area that could be used to bring ships in and unload and reload. Now, there are two major building projects in Alexandria that were considered some of the greatest things ever built in the history of the world. One of them was the lighthouse at Alexandria. It was a 350-foot tall lighthouse. It was a tower. 350 feet. It's like taking a football field and standing it on end. It was meant to be able to guide ships into the harbor at night and during the day. So we know that it had to have some sort of very bright light to be able to bring people in, let them see from far away. We know that it was destroyed in an earthquake. It stood for many, many years, but ultimately it succumbed to an earthquake. The other major building was the library at Alexandria. And it was believed to be the biggest and most complete library in the world. The Greeks tried to get a copy of everything that was ever written. And the way they did that was that they had all these ships coming into their big double harbor at Alexandria. And part of the tax of doing business in Alexandria was you had to turn over anything that you had that was written, scrolls, books, papers, anything. And those books and scrolls and papers would be taken to the library at Alexandria, and there was a crew of men whose job was to copy down everything that you had on your ship and get it done as quickly as possible and return to you so that you could leave. Well, bad news. Great building, filled with paper. Ultimately, that building burnt down. So, the library at Alexandria was lost.